The most attractive thing you can bring into a relationship is not a perfect appearance, the perfect text, or some clever technique that makes someone chase you. It is the way you feel about yourself when nobody is giving you attention. Because there is a difference between a woman who wants to be chosen and a woman who knows she has a choice. And that difference can completely change the way she experiences dating. You can walk into a room and be beautiful, intelligent, funny, successful, and interesting, and still feel completely powerless if your attention is constantly focused on one question: does he like me? But imagine asking a different question. Do I like who I am when I'm around him? Do I like the way he treats me? Does this connection actually make my life better? That shift sounds small, but psychologically it changes everything. Because when you stop making someone else's approval the measurement of your worth, you become calmer, you become more present, you stop trying to perform. And that is often where genuine attraction becomes possible. So today I want to talk about 3 confident female mindsets that can make a woman deeply attractive, not because they manipulate a man into falling for her, but because they communicate something powerful about who she is. The first mindset is this: I want you, but I don't need you to validate me. Now, let's be careful with that phrase. Being confident does not mean pretending you don't care. It doesn't mean becoming cold. It doesn't mean ignoring his messages for 6 hours because you want to look mysterious. And it certainly doesn't mean playing games. It means you can genuinely like someone without handing them responsibility for your emotional stability. That is a huge distinction. Imagine you meet a man you really like. He texts you in the morning and you feel amazing. Then he doesn't text again for 8 hours and suddenly your entire mood changes. You start wondering, did I say something wrong? Is he losing interest? Why hasn't he replied? Should I send another message? And now something interesting has happened. Your emotional state has become dependent on the behavior of someone you barely know. This is where anxiety can disguise itself as attraction. You may think, I must really like him because I can't stop thinking about him. But sometimes you're not thinking about the person, you're thinking about the uncertainty. And uncertainty can become incredibly consuming. A confident mindset says, I enjoy this connection, but I am still living my life. You continue studying, you continue working, you see your friends, you pursue your goals, you take care of yourself, you laugh, you sleep peacefully. And if he texts, wonderful. If he doesn't, you don't collapse. That doesn't make you less feminine. It doesn't make you less interested. It makes you emotionally grounded. And here's what most people never realize. Emotional independence creates a completely different quality of interaction. When you're desperate for approval, every conversation becomes an audition. You're thinking, what should I say so he likes me? But when you're secure, the conversation becomes an experience. You think, let's see who this person really is. That is powerful because instead of trying to convince him that you're worthy of being chosen, you're giving yourself permission to discover whether he deserves access to your life. And that leads us to another important point. A confident woman doesn't ask, how do I make him obsessed with me? She asks, what kind of relationship am I available for? That question changes your standards. For example, imagine a man who is incredibly charming. He gives you compliments. He makes you laugh. There's chemistry. But he's inconsistent. He disappears for days. He makes plans and cancels them. He gives you attention whenever it's convenient for him. An insecure mindset might say, how can I get him to commit? A confident mindset says, Chemistry isn't enough for me. I need consistency too. That's self-respect. And self-respect doesn't mean rejecting everyone who makes a mistake. It means paying attention to patterns. Because everyone can have a bad day. Everyone can become busy. Everyone can communicate poorly sometimes. But when inconsistency becomes the relationship, you have to stop calling it potential. You have to call it information. And this is where the second mindset becomes so important. The second mindset is, I don't chase clarity from someone who is committed to giving me confusion. Think about how many women spend enormous amounts of emotional energy trying to decode someone. He watched my story but didn't reply. He liked my picture. He said he misses me but hasn't made plans. He was affectionate yesterday, but distant today. And suddenly dating becomes detective work. You're analyzing punctuation. You're analyzing response times. You're analyzing emojis. But here's the problem. When someone genuinely wants to build something with you, you shouldn't have to become a private investigator to discover it. Yes, attraction can be complicated. Yes, people have fears. Yes, some people are shy. But healthy interest usually creates movement. They initiate, they make time, they communicate, they show curiosity about your life, they make an effort to see you. They don't have to be perfect, but you can feel that they're participating. And if you're constantly doing all the emotional labor, that's not romance. That's exhaustion. Now, this doesn't mean you should immediately walk away every time someone doesn't text you exactly when you want. It means you stop over-functioning. If you've already expressed interest, you don't need to prove it 10 more times. If you've already made the invitation, you don't need to make every future plan. If you've shown warmth, you don't need to chase warmth back. Give the other person room to reveal themselves, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop filling every silence. Not as a tactic, as a way of gathering information. And this is where everything changes. When you stop chasing, you're not trying to make him miss you. You're allowing yourself to see whether he actually moves towards you when you stop doing all the moving. That tells you something. Maybe he steps forward, maybe he reaches out, maybe he starts making plans, and if he doesn't, that hurts, but it also gives you clarity. And clarity is far more valuable than false hope, because your goal isn't to win someone who doesn't know whether they want you. Your goal is to build a relationship where interest is mutual. And there is one final part of this mindset that I want you to remember. You don't need to become less caring to become more confident. You need to become more selective about where you place your care. There is a huge difference between having a big heart and giving your heart to anyone who gives you a little attention. Your kindness is valuable. Your affection is valuable. Your time is valuable. Your emotional energy is valuable. So don't use those things to purchase someone's love. Give them where they are appreciated, because the right relationship won't require you to constantly shrink yourself, perform for approval, or wonder whether you're enough. You won't have to become someone else to hold their attention. You will simply become more fully yourself. And that is where the third mindset takes us. Because once you stop asking, how do I get him to choose me? You can finally ask the question that changes everything. What kind of woman do I want to be, regardless of who chooses me? And that question brings us to the third mindset. My life is already meaningful, and a relationship is meant to add to it, not become the entire foundation of it. This is one of the most powerful forms of confidence you can develop, because when your whole emotional world revolves around whether a man chooses you, dating becomes frightening. Every date feels like an exam. Every unanswered message feels like rejection. Every disagreement feels like the beginning of the end. But when you have a life that you genuinely care about, something changes. You still want love, you still want intimacy, you still want someone to come home to, but you don't approach relationships from emptiness. You approach them from fullness, and that affects everything. Think about two people walking into the same room. One is thinking, I hope someone here likes me. The other is thinking, I wonder who I'll connect with. They may look identical from the outside, but internally, they are operating from completely different places. The first person is searching for approval. The second person is exploring possibility. And people can often feel that difference. Not because there is some magical energy that makes someone irresistible, but because your internal state affects your behavior. When you're insecure, you may talk too much because you're nervous. You may agree with everything he says because you want him to like you. You may hide your opinions. You may laugh at things you don't actually find funny. You may accept behavior you normally wouldn't accept. You may become so focused on being desirable that you forget to be yourself. But when you feel secure in your own life, you can actually be present. You can disagree respectfully. You can say, I don't see it that way. You can laugh naturally. You can say no. You can express what you want. And strangely enough, those ordinary acts of authenticity can create far more attraction than trying to appear perfect. Because people don't build meaningful relationships with performances. They build them with people. So ask yourself, am I trying to be impressive or am I allowing myself to be known? That's a powerful question. Imagine you're on a date and he tells you that he loves a particular hobby. Maybe you don't care about it at all. An insecure response might be, oh my God, I love that too. Even though you don't. Why? Because you're trying to create compatibility. But a confident response might be, that's interesting. I've never really understood the appeal. What do you love about it? Now you're not pretending. You're curious, you're engaging, you're allowing two different people to meet, and that is healthier. Because compatibility doesn't mean liking everything the other person likes. Compatibility means being able to respect each other's differences while sharing enough values to build something meaningful. But here's where many people get confused. They think confidence means becoming completely independent and never needing anyone. That's not confidence. That's emotional armor. There is nothing weak about wanting affection. There is nothing weak about missing someone. There is nothing weak about saying, I care about you. Real confidence allows vulnerability. The difference is that vulnerability says, this is how I feel. Insecurity says, you must respond in exactly the way I need, or I can't be okay. Those are completely different things. You can tell a man, I really enjoyed seeing you tonight. That's vulnerability. You don't need to follow it with 5 messages asking when you'll see him again. You can say, I miss you. That's vulnerability. You don't need to turn it into pressure. You can tell someone, I want a serious relationship. That's confidence. Because you're being honest about what you want. The goal isn't to become so detached that nothing matters. The goal is to care without abandoning yourself. And that is a skill. It takes practice. Maybe you've spent years believing that being a good partner means giving everything. Giving more time, giving more chances, giving more explanations, giving more forgiveness, giving more emotional labor. But sometimes the healthiest thing you can give a relationship is a boundary. A boundary says, I care about this connection, but I also care about myself. And that's not punishment. It's clarity. For example, if someone repeatedly cancels plans at the last minute, you don't need to create a dramatic speech. You can simply say, I enjoy spending time with you, but consistency matters to me. If you're genuinely interested, I'd like us to make plans we can both keep. That's calm, that's mature, that's confident. You're not threatening, you're not begging, you're not manipulating, you're communicating. And then you watch what happens, because your boundary isn't there to control his behavior. It's there to clarify what you will and won't participate in. That distinction can save you years of heartache. And here's another thing I want you to understand. Confidence doesn't guarantee that someone will choose you. And that's actually the point. You don't develop confidence so that every man wants you. You develop confidence so that the wrong man's lack of interest doesn't destroy your sense of worth. That is freedom, because there will always be someone who doesn't see your value. There will always be someone who isn't ready, someone who isn't compatible, someone who wants something different, someone who simply doesn't feel the chemistry you feel, and none of that means you're inadequate. Rejection becomes much easier to survive when you stop interpreting it as a verdict on your identity. Sometimes rejection is simply information. It tells you this person isn't your person. And yes, it can hurt. You can cry, you can feel disappointed, you can wish things had worked. Confidence doesn't mean you never feel pain. It means pain doesn't get to define your worth. This is especially important if you've experienced a relationship where you are constantly trying to earn someone's attention. Maybe you remember checking your phone repeatedly. Maybe you remember feeling incredible when he finally responded, and then anxious again when he disappeared. Maybe you remember telling yourself, if I can just be more attractive, more understanding, more patient, more interesting, he'll finally choose me. But what if the lesson wasn't that you needed to become more? What if the lesson was that you needed to stop negotiating against yourself? Because love should not require you to audition indefinitely. And this is where confidence becomes incredibly attractive. Not because it creates some psychological trick, but because it creates emotional safety. A confident woman can express interest without overwhelming someone. She can receive affection without becoming dependent on it. She can give space without playing games. She can communicate without demanding. She can walk away without revenge. She can stay without losing herself. That's emotional maturity. And if you're thinking, but I'm not naturally confident, I want you to hear this. Confidence isn't something you either have or don't have. It's something you practice. You practice it every time you say what you actually think. You practice it every time you stop apologizing for having reasonable needs. You practice it every time you choose your dignity over temporary attention. You practice it every time you let someone show you who they are instead of creating excuses for them. And you practice it every time you choose your own life, even when someone you desire hasn't chosen you yet. That last one is particularly important because your life cannot be put on hold while you're waiting for someone else to decide your future. Go to dinner with your friends, work towards your goals, take the class, build your career, travel when you can, read the book, exercise, laugh, create, learn. Become someone you genuinely enjoy being. Then when love arrives, it doesn't become your rescue. It becomes your companion. And that's a completely different kind of relationship. You don't look at the person and think, please complete me. You look at them and think, I love what we're creating together. That's the difference between dependency and partnership. And perhaps the most beautiful thing about all three mindsets is that none of them require you to become someone you're not. You don't have to become cold. You don't have to pretend you're busy. You don't have to manipulate his emotions. You don't have to make him jealous. You don't have to calculate every text. You don't have to disappear to make him chase you. You simply have to return to yourself, because the woman who knows her worth doesn't spend all day asking, how can I make him want me? She asks, does this relationship allow me to be fully myself? And when you start living from that question, your dating life can change dramatically. Not because every man suddenly becomes interested, but because you become far less willing to settle for relationships that make you question your value. And that is a victory far greater than making someone chase you. The goal isn't to become unforgettable to every man. The goal is to become unforgettable to yourself, to remember who you are, to remember what you want, to remember what you deserve, and to understand that love should meet you there, not require you to abandon yourself to find it. And perhaps this is the part I most want you to remember. You don't become confident because one day a man finally tells you that you're beautiful enough, interesting enough, or worthy enough. You become confident when you stop requiring someone else to give you that permission. Because if your sense of worth depends on romantic attention, there will always be someone who can take it away. One day he texts you constantly and you feel incredible. The next day he's busy and suddenly you question yourself. One week you're receiving compliments and the next week you're wondering whether you've somehow become less attractive. But you didn't change. Your value didn't rise when he noticed you, and it didn't fall when his attention disappeared. This is why your relationship with yourself has to become stronger than your relationship with anyone else's approval. And that doesn't happen through positive affirmations alone. It happens through behavior. You tell yourself you're worthy, and then you behave like someone who believes it. You say you deserve consistency, and then you stop accepting a pattern of inconsistency. You say you want honesty, and then you become honest about what you actually need. You say you want love, and then you stop confusing anxiety with chemistry. That's when confidence becomes real. And here's something fascinating about attraction. The more desperately you try to control whether someone likes you, the less authentic you become. You start monitoring yourself. How am I coming across? Was that message too much? Did I laugh too loudly? Should I wait before replying? Should I tell him I miss him? You're no longer experiencing the relationship. You're managing the relationship. And there is a huge difference. A healthy connection needs room for two people to be human. Sometimes you will send the first text. Sometimes he will. Sometimes you'll have a great conversation. Sometimes one of you will be tired. Sometimes you'll disagree. Sometimes you'll misunderstand each other. The goal isn't perfect behavior. The goal is mutual effort, respect, and emotional safety. So don't turn confidence into another performance. You don't need to memorize a list of rules about how many hours you should wait before responding. You don't need to pretend you don't care. If you want to text him, text him. If you enjoyed the date, tell him. If you miss him, you can say so. But then let the relationship breathe. You don't need to force a response. You don't need to send another message because he hasn't replied. You don't need to create a crisis because there is a little silence. You communicate and then you observe. That is one of the most emotionally intelligent things you can do in dating. Communicate, then observe. Because people reveal themselves through patterns, not just promises, not just chemistry, not just beautiful words, patterns. Does he make an effort? Does he respect your boundaries? Does he listen? Does he show curiosity about your world? Does he follow through? Does he make you feel emotionally safe? Does he treat you with consideration even when he doesn't get what he wants? Those questions tell you far more than whether he sends you a heart emoji at midnight. And here's where your confidence can protect you from one of the biggest traps in dating: potential. Potential is seductive. You meet someone and think, if he just became a little more consistent, if he just opened up, if he just realized how much I care, if he just got over his fear, then everything would be perfect. But you're not dating potential. You're dating a person. And that person is showing you who they are right now. Maybe they can change. Maybe they will grow. But you cannot build a healthy relationship around the person you hope someone becomes. You have to look at what exists today. And that doesn't mean you become cynical, it means you become discerning. There is a beautiful difference between being hopeful and being blind. Hope says, I believe good things are possible. Blindness says, I'll ignore everything that contradicts what I want to believe. Your confidence allows you to hold both hope and reality at the same time. You can think, I really like him, while also thinking, I'm going to pay attention to how he treats me. You can think, this chemistry is incredible, while also asking, is there compatibility? You can think, I want this relationship, while remaining willing to accept the truth if it isn't healthy. That is strength. And sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is leave a situation she desperately wanted to work. Not because she stopped caring, because she finally started caring about herself too. Maybe you've experienced that before. Maybe you stayed longer than you should have because you thought leaving meant giving up, but sometimes leaving isn't giving up. Sometimes leaving is accepting reality. And acceptance can be incredibly painful because it forces you to stop arguing with what is. But once you stop arguing with reality, you regain your power. You stop thinking, how do I make this person change? And you start thinking, what can I choose now? That question is liberating because you can't control another person's feelings. You can't control whether someone commits. You can't control whether someone becomes emotionally available. You can't control whether someone recognizes your value, but you can control what you participate in. You can control how honestly you communicate. You can control whether you continue investing in a one-sided connection. You can control whether you abandon your standards because you're afraid of losing someone. And this is the deeper meaning behind confidence. Confidence isn't believing that everyone will choose you. Confidence is believing that you will be okay even when someone doesn't. Once you understand that, dating becomes less frightening. You stop approaching every interaction with the fear of losing. You become curious, you become playful, you become open. You allow attraction to develop naturally. And ironically, that's often when you become much more magnetic. Not because you're using psychology to manipulate someone, but because you're no longer trying to manipulate the outcome. You're simply showing up as yourself, and that is the kind of confidence that can create genuine attraction. So if you're currently single, don't use this time only to figure out how to become more desirable. Use it to become more discerning. Ask yourself what kind of relationship you want. Ask yourself what kind of communication makes you feel secure. Ask yourself what your boundaries are. Ask yourself what you refuse to normalize. Ask yourself what kind of woman you want to be when you are deeply in love, because it's easy to have standards when you're not emotionally attached. The real test comes when you really like someone. That's when you discover whether your standards are real. Can you remain yourself when you're afraid of losing him? Can you communicate instead of manipulating? Can you walk away from disrespect even when the chemistry is intense? Can you receive love without constantly fearing that it will disappear? Can you let someone come toward you instead of doing all the work? Those are the moments where confidence becomes visible. And remember, you don't need to become perfect. You will still have insecure days. You'll still overthink sometimes. You'll still wonder whether someone likes you. You'll still have moments when your heart gets ahead of your logic. That's human. The goal isn't to eliminate those feelings. The goal is to stop letting those feelings make every decision for you. You can feel anxious and still wait before reacting. You can miss someone and still continue your day. You can want reassurance and still communicate calmly. You can love someone and still maintain your boundaries. That is emotional strength. And if there is one final idea I want you to take from this, it's this. Never make yourself smaller to make someone else comfortable enough to choose you. You don't need to become quieter. You don't need to become endlessly accommodating. You don't need to hide your intelligence. You don't need to suppress your personality. You don't need to pretend you want less than you actually want. The right relationship isn't built by finding the perfect version of yourself. It's built when two imperfect people are willing to meet each other honestly. So walk into your next relationship with curiosity instead of desperation, with openness instead of performance, with standards instead of walls, with vulnerability instead of dependency, and with the quiet belief that your life is already valuable. Because when you know that, a man's attention becomes something you enjoy, not something you need in order to feel whole. You can appreciate his smile without needing it to validate you. You can enjoy his affection without becoming dependent on it. You can love deeply without losing yourself. And you can choose someone without forgetting that you are also choosing. That is the confidence worth developing, not the confidence that makes every man chase you. The confidence that allows you to recognize the man who is willing to walk beside you. And when you become that woman, you stop asking, how do I make him choose me? You start asking, is this the kind of love I choose? That question can change everything.